All righty. Good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world today. Excited to discuss a topic that has gotten a lot of press, especially in the United States lately. So today we're going to start with intros, and then we'll talk about what we're going to cover today, and then get right into some meaty questions and content. So Shannon Flanagan, I am your moderator today. I am the founder of Retail Connected, an advisory practice firm. I also founded Retail Women in Tech. I've been retailing it since I was 18. I don't like to say how many years anymore. I've worked for brands like Lands' End, Macy's, Gap Inc., focused a lot on omni-channel transformation, shows my age, but also have done 2 stints of consulting at Accenture and Slalom. Most recently, I was the GM at TalkDesk, a contact center technology platform, and I'm now advising for an incredible Gen AI company called Ryder. I've gotten to learn a lot about self-service, and not just as experiencing as a consumer, but also with these super smart guys that are going to take us through what good looks like today. So because we have two Matts, I'm going to refer to one as Mueller, and then the other one as Matt. So Mueller, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll turn it over to Matt Redwood.
Sure, Shannon. Thanks for the intro, and just great to see everybody here today. Thank you. My name is Matt Mueller. I am the author of the best-selling book, The Mindful Innovator. I have also been in retail since I was 18 years old, just as well, in the grocery channel, running stores as a part-time deli associate, all the way up to deli manager, and then wound up going to the CPG side of the business to start an innovation team. Left there a couple of years ago to now help retailers and brands help them innovate, really identify, prioritize, and execute innovation so they can meet the ever-evolving consumer needs and beat the competition. So great to be here and excited to talk about self-service today.
Absolutely. Shannon, Matt, great to share the stage with you, and welcome to all of our participants today. My name is Matt Redwood. I'm Vice President of Retail Technology at Diebold Nixdorf. So I have responsibility for our core businesses, our POS, our self-service checkout, and our kiosk businesses, with responsibility for product strategy, go-to-market strategy, R&D, and product management. And I've had the pleasure of working my entire career in retail technology, and more specifically in the world of self-service, working with retailers all over the globe on not just self-service, but technology innovation and front-end transformation.
All righty, so let's dive in. I'm going to give a little blurb about self-service. And what's really exciting for those who are participating today, you will receive a complimentary copy of Rethink Retail's report on self-service, which I had the pleasure of getting a preview of. And I got to tell you, there's a lot of wow moments in there, one of which I'll share here in a second. We know self-service technology is global. And in fact, when we were preparing for this, both Matts were able to provide some really great examples in Europe, which is doing self-service well. But just in the United States, the North America self-checkout systems market is valued at $2.6 billion, with projections indicating that it'll exceed $6 billion in the next 6 years. And a whopping 96% of grocery stores are offering, in the US, are offering self-checkout. That was the one that really wowed me from some of the statistics there. And we know the reality is, right, we want more control of our shopping experiences. We want to shop wherever, whenever, and however we want. And that's becoming more and more the case. We don't think in channels as consumers, even if retailers and brands continue to do so. What we want is convenient, frictionless, and fast experiences. And how retailers have provided that in the world of self-service varies greatly. We know those experiences. It's not an easy task to nail it. But as we discussed, and something I think is a no-brainer, but still not well executed, is it has to be a customer-centric design approach, inclusive of all the relevant functions, and of course, the technologies, which are key to unlocking that, which we'll talk about today. As a result, self-service can be a big win for staff and shoppers alike. So today we have a whole bunch of different questions. I think we'll cover almost everything there is to know about self-service, and really looking at why self-service is a very valid strategy, despite some of the bad press it's been getting. So we're going to address those common misconceptions and share these smart strategies to help you step up your self-service offerings. So let's go ahead and get into it. So Matt R. So we know self-service is constantly evolving. Today, there's capabilities that weren't openly available 2 to 5 years ago. What are, in your opinion, some of the most important advancements we've seen in the last couple of years? And then Mueller, would love to hear from you as well.
Absolutely. So great question to open this session with. So self-service has been around for 25 years now. I can't quite believe it's been around for that long. And we've seen a lot of iteration and innovation in that time. But I think over the last 3 to 5 years, particularly since the COVID years, we've really seen an advancement of the core technology. And when I say core technology, I'm talking about the actual self-service devices themselves. What have we seen more of over the last 2 to 3 years? I'd say variants have become commonplace across the retail environment. So if I go back 10, 15 years, self-service was very much a device designed to remove cost from operating a store. If I look at the retail environment now, it's really transformed into a service improvement device where we see lots of different variants across the retail environment. So if you go into a grocery retailer today, you are likely to see 2, 3, sometimes up to even 5 different variants of self-service checkout within that store. And each one of those variants is really focused on delivering against a different consumer experience. So gone are the days where retailers would put 6 of one particular type of self-service checkout in a store and try and force the full customer demographic through those 6 lanes. Now we're really seeing a much more considered approach with different technologies focused on different customer journeys. And there might be 5 or 6 different customer journeys in the store that have different needs, and those consumers have different expectations. So we're seeing a lot of variance, and that capability of variant has really been driven by the development of the technology, that there's now much more flexibility in not only the hardware. We've moved very much more towards a kind of platformatic approach, and that's really unlocked retailers to experiment with different technologies to support different customer journeys. Obviously, on top of that, and we'll get onto that more a little bit later in the webinar, we're starting to see more emerging technologies on top of that core platform. So the big buzzword of last year and continues into this year, AI. We're starting to see more and more AI creep into the retail environment to improve the experience for the consumer, make it a little bit more efficient for the retailer, and ultimately boost the in-store experience for that bricks and mortar store.
Yeah, it's great points, Matt, and totally see the variance too as well. But I want to kind of back it up too. Like I was thinking about the first time that I ever experienced self-checkout, and it was like a quarter century ago, where I was working in Wallbounds, and we started putting in these self-checkout stations, and it was just, it was so interesting at the time. Just this was self-service in the grocery industry. This was self-service in retail, where you scan your own groceries and you get out of the store. But with the advancements that we're seeing today, it's completely changing, and the definition of self-service can really be much wider than just checkout, right? We're seeing self-service options happen in numerous different ways along the whole consumer journey. So even more variants, right? So like I was in a Lowe's Home Improvement a few months ago, and they have a locker system in the front of the store, and now consumers can order their products online, and it goes into the locker right in the front of the store. They can go and pick it up whenever they want. Totally self-service, just a different way of approaching self-service. And you even look at like the deli of the future. Something that I worked on personally was, figuring out what does that shopping experience look like for the consumer in the deli. And, not necessarily do you need to talk to a deli associate to get product in that store anymore. You can actually go to a kiosk, go shop the store and take care of all your grocery shopping, and then come back to a pickup station within those stores. So we're finding more and more like touch points along the journey that can now be turned into a self-service moment.
I think you nailed something, which is going to be a great parlay into the next question, which self-service is much more than just checkout. It's about anything, product information, or how I'm navigating through the store, digital shelf coupons, et cetera, which I know we'll touch a little bit more on all the various ways we can do self-checkout. But let's address the elephant in the room. At least what's true in the US is that we're hearing that self-checkout is being reduced, et cetera. What are the myths and the challenges related out there that are misconceptions, and what stands out to you most? And then let's talk about the flip side. Like, where do we see it being done really well? So Matt, I'll start with you again, and then we'll go over to Mueller on his point of view on this.
Absolutely. So two myths I'd really like to discuss and really burst the myth here today. The first is that self-service is a concept designed to remove staff from the experience and from the store. The second, which is the bigger elephant in the room, that if you put self-service into your store, you will drive shrink up, theft in your store. So if we start with the first one, I think the common misconception, because of the birth of self-service, was really designed to remove the cost of operating stores. And certainly a lot of retailers in the early days used it as a way to remove staff from the store. But we're 25 years later, and a lot of those initial retailers have been through 2 or 3 technology refreshes since then. The conversations that we're having with retailers, whether they're new or existing self-service users, is very much, how do I use self-service to drive efficiency in the process to actually free up my members of staff to deliver the consumer experience at the part of the journey, as Matt said, that really makes sense. So, we're seeing more variants of self-service checkout, and that's not to remove staff. That's really to free up staff. And we talk about labor redistribution now. If I have self-service checkouts or self-service devices that can perform a task, a part of the journey that can be done by the consumer themselves, that then frees up that member of staff to be elsewhere in the store, to provide a personal service, to customize that service, and ultimately deliver the experience to the consumer at the part of the process that makes sense. So, a lot of grocery retailers are looking at, well, can I free up members of staff from my front end to actually distribute them across the aisles, so that if I've got a consumer that can't find a product, or I can't get the products out onto the shelves quick enough, I've got enough staff where it makes sense to deliver that consumer where it really, really makes sense. I think the second topic, which is retail shrink. I mean, self-service is kind of the negative word at the moment. It's very much associated with retail shrink, but we're seeing shrink across the board. And particularly as we're starting to get more involved in the AI technologies, where we're not only monitoring shrink, but we're trying to actually remove it from the process. We're actually finding, and a lot of retailers are finding, that there's a lot less shrink that happens at self-service than they originally thought. And that then turns their attention to other areas of the store where shrink might be happening. And as we've gone deeper on that journey with different retailers, and we've started to tighten up the capability of people that do want to steal at checkout, those that are maliciously stealing, i.e. they're going to a store to purposely steal, will always gravitate to the area of the store that's easiest for them. So it's very much about providing the right operations in your store to make sure that you're not treating everyone as guilty until they're proven innocent. You have the right staffing model across your store to deliver the experience where it really makes sense for your consumers. And then you overlay the right technology that can nip and tuck the process and make sure that those that are purposely trying to deceive the systems are caught and dealt with appropriately.
Nailed it. Mueller, what else would you add to that?
Well, I have to totally agree on those myths, and I want to expand a little bit too on one of those, which is that, you're thinking about how, well, first I want to actually start off with customers prefer human interaction, right? So that's like one of the first myths, like that a lot of retailers and brands say, hey, my consumers want that human interaction, and that totally could be the case some of the times, but not all the time. So self-checkout allows us to really be able to create an experience that a consumer wants, and being flexible, like that variance that Matt talked about earlier. It's just, sometimes they do want that self-checkout, sometimes they don't. When we think about, like, say, the deli experience, like when we thought that consumers wanted that deli experience, with a human being, with the deli associate. And that was true when the person was available and they had very specific questions that they needed to ask and needed to get a particular task done. However, other times that wasn't necessary. And really what they wanted to do was just get their product and get out of the store. So it really just depended on what exactly they were trying to do there. The other myth that Matt spoke about earlier was that this is taking jobs away from employees. Right now, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's 549,000 U.S. jobs in the retail market that are available, and that number is only growing. So the idea that it's taking jobs away is completely just not true. And what it's doing, it is allowing us to reallocate those hours to more consumer-centric tasks that need to be done, and that can actually create a better consumer experience. So it's only going to enhance consumer experience.
Well, so let's turn over, because we've got some meaty facts that are going to support the things we've already discussed. which is getting the view from a customer perspective and what they're looking for. And furthermore, the results that a business can see. So I believe our partner in crime, Aaliyah, is going to pull up some stats from the research report that we'll be sharing out here at the end of the session. All righty. So, I mean, this is a big number. I was actually more impressed by the second number, but 43% of consumers actually prefer self-checkout to a traditional cashier, and it's continuing to arise amongst those that are a little younger than me. Though I have I have use cases that I love to use it. I have others that I don't. But 53%. So that's saying, hey, even if the press is saying, oh, a handful of people are more than maybe that, but some people are frustrated by it. The reality is we come back to that we as customers want to be able to interact with the brand and our experience on our terms. And there is a growing now moving to a majority of people who actually want that. We got another meaty slide, and then we'll have Matt Mueller talk about these in just a second. Okay, this one's important. And I think this is where we come back to, it's not that self-service is bad or self-checkout is bad, but how you do it makes or breaks the experience. So a smooth, I feel like that should be bouncing or blinking in big lights, increases overall customer satisfaction and can lead to a 15% increase in sales, because really, again, you're creating less friction and making it easier for people to actually convert and walk out of the store with what they need. Last but not least, this is pretty huge. Look at this. And this is now a worldwide stat. And we talked about a whopping 96% of US retailers. But what I think we need are grocers. I think, again, we have the opportunity. It's much broader than just being at a big box store or at a grocer, right? We're seeing it like in H&M. We talked about with an important technology called RFID, which we know we're all passionate about, which is key to enabling smooth self-checkouts, right? But I had the experience as I threw my clothes in a bin, it scanned it all, and I got my receipt and I was out in no time. And so when we think about the rise of this, it really does demonstrate that this is here to stay. So how you do it is where retailers really need to spend their time to make sure that they are getting that frictionless experience. So that's my take on those couple of slides, though I'm not the expert. So Mueller, you go first.
Well, I should actually just have my empty chair here as you say that. But these numbers are crazy. I mean, just thinking about how much it's going to expand on self-checkout is just, it shows you that it is a consumer need. Consumers absolutely are getting to a point where this is an expectation. You need to have self-checkout, and the technology. I mean, it's evident that the technology is finally at a point where we're ready for it. We're able to enable this within our stores and integrate into our stores a lot easier than we once were able to before in the past. But I think what's really important for retailers to consider at this point, and brands to consider, is the full consumer experience with the brand. So thinking about the grocery experience, 25% of customers shop the deli, and that's their interaction with an employee within the store. The other 75%, the only interaction they're having in the grocery store is with the checkout person. So now you have to think about, what does your brand stand for? And what are the personality that you want to come through? Because right now it's the employee that's doing that for you. If you go in Florida, you went to a public store where shopping is a pleasure, that employee is going to deliver an experience that creates that public experience. So now if you have self-checkout, how exactly is that coming to life? And how do you not become a commodity? Because if I want to go into a store and buy Clorox and there's a self-checkout in a CVS, a Publix, and a Walmart, it doesn't matter what store I go to. So how are you going to differentiate your brand and not become a commodity? That is going to be so important. And something that we did when we did this at Boar's Head, we had a self-service case, in the deli department where people can purchase products that were sliced in the deli and then placed out front. But we just didn't put it in a Ziploc bag and just left it as another product that was out there. We had to differentiate from private label, differentiate from Oscar Mayer. So we had to make sure that it wasn't just this normal Ziploc bag. What are those tactile things that you can leave with your consumer that make sure that it exudes your brand? So just thinking about all those touch points, like if it's not going to be the employee that's going to represent your brand, what will represent your brand? I think it's just so important for us to all just mindfully think about as self-checkout becomes a bigger and bigger part of our business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I would always urge any retailer that's looking to go on a self-service journey, whether you're in grocery or in a different sub-vertical, is to really start with two important points. What is the problem statement that you're looking to solve? Every retail store might be the same consumers will have a slightly different issue that they're trying to solve. And it might be not enough staff. They can't attract and retain staff to actually work in the store. It might be that there's too many queues in the store. It might be that you're not offering consumers choice, but understanding that problem statement is a really, really important piece of work to do first. The second is really to understand your consumer. And the example I always give is that you could be a grocery retailer with different formats of store, from convenience store all the way up to hypermarket. It might be the same consumer that's shopping in each one of your different formats on different days. Same consumer, very, very different expectations. So you've got to understand the different consumers that are shopping in each one of your stores, and critically, what does good look like for them? Because if I'm shopping on a Tuesday afternoon and I'm running into a convenience store to grab lunch, I want to get in and out as quickly as possible. If I'm shopping with my family in that same brand, but maybe a different store format and a Saturday, I probably want more of an experience. I want more staff interaction. I'm the same consumer, but I want a very, very different experience. And if you can start to then map those consumer journeys, you can understand then where does the technology fit into that, and where does it critically enhance the consumer journey, but also make those members of staff more efficient in serving that customer and delivering that good expectation, that good experience that consumer expects from your brand.
Well, you're leading right into the next section, which is digging in a little bit deeper to what those self-service strategies are. Before we do that, in my last role, where I got to really dive deeper into the customer service space, is one of the questions I would ask prospects or even customers is, have you shopped your own brand? What's the experience like? Is that an experience you would want to have, right? Do you so I think that there's still that opportunity, because we talked about solving the problem points, but also what is that experience you want for the customer? So let's talk a little bit more for that. So Matt, we've said it already, but let's dive a little bit different in talking about, is it possible for self-service to be one size fit all? No, I think we've already established that. So what does customization look like for different retail environments, right? We've been talking a lot about grocery, but there's a lot more that self-service means. Again, not just about checkout, but also different types of product categories.
Sure. So I think, you've hit the nail on the head. Is it one size fits all? Absolutely not. Every store should have a different technology mix. It should have a different experience. It should have a different amount of consumer and staff interaction, depending on the format of that store, the customer journeys that are coming through it, and critically what they expect. And I think, your comments about shopping your own brand is really, really important. You got to spend time in the stores to understand who are your consumers, why are they shopping in that particular store, what's their journey through that store look like, and then what interaction do they expect from both a member of staff or a piece of technology. The one caveat I would say is that I would much prefer, as a retailer, configuration rather than customization. I think if you go back 10 years ago, there were a lot of retailers that were going down a very, very heavily customized route, customized technology, be it hardware or software, because they wanted to differentiate themselves. But actually, back to our first question, the first conversation that we had, what's changed over the last 2 or 3 years is the technology advancements have really progressed very, very rapidly, to the point where no retailer should have to customize technology nowadays. There should be enough flexibility built into the software or the hardware, the services that you're deploying, that actually you can configure those for not only your brand, but also the different stores within your brand. So I think it comes back to, ultimately, who are your consumers? Why are they shopping your brand? What does good look like for them? And then how can you provide them with the choice and the channels to interact with you as a brand that's going to deliver that good experience?
Matt, can you talk a little bit more? Because when we were getting really excited and prepping for this session around these topics, what are some of the enabling technologies? Because it isn't just one technology. What's the landscape and footprint look like for retailers to really be able to provide these solutions for their customers and staff?
So one of the big developments I think has happened again over the last 2 to 3 years is the move towards a platformatic approach. We've mentioned a lot already the variants, and if you go back 10 years, to have multiple variants in your estate meant huge complexity because each variant had a different hardware configuration, it had different software that needs to run on it, it might have a different service package. And if you run 5 or 6 different variants, that's adding complexity to your environment and how you manage it. The platformatic approach that we now see a lot of vendors like Diebold Nixdorf providing really allows you the ability to invest once into a platform, but have enough modules and options that you can build up different technologies, different touch points in your store, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So a lot of the engagements that we're seeing now, particularly with retailers that have deployed and had self-service for a long time, they're now looking at, well, how can I improve the deli experience, as Matt said, or how can I improve the experience in the cafe or in the clothing and home area? Because a lot of retailers have had to diversify. There's a lot of kind of store within store concepts now because it's a really competitive landscape. The technology platform approach means that you can have lots of different variants supporting those different customer journeys, but critically, it's all based on one platform. So it's much easier to manage, it's much easier to service, and you can critically drive innovation across all the touch points very, very easily.
As it relates to, again, we know self-service is broader. So when we transition to the next question, which is really diving into strategies and thinking about, again, self-service more broadly, for self-checkout, and I'm going off script here, I'm just thinking about things, is it just a glorified POS? Or when you think about platform, what's all the information and the data that platform is consuming to be able to provide that smooth self-service experience?
Is it a glorified POS? I guess in some ways, from a technology perspective, you could say it is. But the one thing I would say is that the retailers that do it badly treat self-service as a POS. They put it in the store and they just expect, oh, consumers use it because it's widespread, it's everywhere. Everyone uses self-service. The kind of build it and they will come mentality really does not work for self-service. It's very much a full store transformation. If you want to completely automate the processes in your store, not only have you got to really focus on, right, what is the right technology, but also what are the store operations that are around the technology that ultimately enable the staff to interact with it and your consumers to use it. So we very much don't start with the technology. We actually start with what are the customer journeys I'm looking to support. You take the members of staff in the store on that journey and really coach them that this is technology that's not designed to take their job away. It's designed to make them more efficient and deliver the consumer experience where it really matters. So starting with the problem statement, what are we trying to solve? Is it reducing queues? What are my customer journeys that I'm looking to support with technology? And then get to the technology and then wrap it up in the right operations and the staffing models that ultimately make it work.
So, Mueller, let's talk in getting more into some of these strategies that are even just beyond. We've got self-checkout, but we also know, I was thinking about it, right? So in Macy's, I can figure out the price of something. Now we've got a self-service a model in some areas where you can scan information and get product. So let's talk about what retailers should be doing across all of the different self-service options and what should they be avoiding?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really hard to answer because every single brand and every retailer is different on what strategies they should implement. You said something before, Shannon, where it's like, shopping your stores, shopping your brand. It's so important. I go one further. Like something I do with my clients is ethnographic research, and I think it's really important not just to shop your store, but it's important to shop with your customer and let them lead you. There are such amazing insights when you walk a store, and I'm doing this with like a retail executive and an actual consumer that shops their store. And we just let them lead the way. Just tell us, what you're thinking as you are shopping the store from the moment you walk into the door to the moment that we're leaving and loading up your trunk. What are the things that are going through? And everything that we believe is held on the side. We are so biased. Like we believe that that consumers want a certain thing. Oh, they absolutely want convenience. They want to get out of the store fast. Is that really the case? Let's find out from the consumer and let them actually lead the way and tell us exactly what they want and what their expectations are. And doing the same thing with the employee as well, and doing work alongs with your employees. Like retail leaders, we should be spending time with our employees at the front lines, spending time with them to understand what is it that they really need to be successful in their job. So you do implement those right platforms, and making sure that they're getting the jobs done effectively and creating the best CX. So I think it's hard to answer as far as like what is the right strategy, because it could be so different depending on the different retailer and the different brand and the different consumer that you're facing.
Well, and one of the areas we didn't touch on, even in our discussions coming into this, but if I put the old hat I used to wear, or the hat I used to wear in my old world, is self-service from a customer service perspective, right? No, for many years, and still is the case at some retailers, I actually need to talk to somebody to know where my order is, and that's something that should be 99% of the time does not require human interaction. And we know that, chatbots or a self-service approach, they have not been historically all that effective or customer friendly, but certainly with the advent of Gen AI, and retailers really understanding that self-service can happen both in stores, but certainly through the contact center is also an important part of the strategy when they're thinking about how do I meet the customer where they are and giving them the experiences they need to have. Now, I love this question. So Mueller, we'll have you keep chatting if you've had a chance to have a sip of water in between. Is what are the strategies to drive adoption among shoppers? How do we get better at self-service?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. Like I've implemented programs where we had self-service in stores and they completely bombed. And it could be tough because you have to make sure that you are making it frictionless. Like when a consumer walks into this new experience that this one day and it's self-service, like is there going to be friction within that experience, or are they going to be able to pick it up and get a benefit that's 10 times greater than they did the day before that they shopped? So you have to make sure that you are making it frictionless and it's 10 times better. A great example of this was Publix, and they actually put in, they were really late to the game on self-service. Like they had cashiers until probably about 2 years ago, and then they started putting in these new self-checkout areas. But it was interesting because they had like 6 or so kiosks, and they still loaded it up with like 3 or 4 employees. And it was just like they had everybody manned. They were checking people out, and it almost looked like, what's this all about? Because it's self-checkout, but yet you're checking them out. They have employees checking them out right there. What they were doing was they were creating an adoption pace, right? So it's like it's starting off with 3 or 4 employees there, and a month later, you take it down to 2, and then a month after that, you take it down to 1. And what they're doing is they're lowering that barrier to entry and increasing adoption as the time goes by. So it really is about figuring out what is that change management system that you're going to put into place to help really get that adoption up. Because if you just put it in and just plug and play, more than likely it's not going to work unless it's really just intuitive.
Yeah, Matt, so a question for you, because we keep using the word friction. What are common friction points in the self-service experience for customers?
Sure. So I think that, the big one that everyone associates with self-service that I think we've all experienced in the past, unexpected item in the bagging area. Security scale related friction. But for us, friction is anything related to the process that adds complexity, causes frustration, or reduces the speed or the efficiency of the device. And what we're doing more and more with retailers now is actually using data. And there is a risk that you can run into paralysis by analysis because there's so much data that swims around a retail store. But if you're very focused in terms of looking for friction at the front end, as an example, it's very, very easily to see in the data where your friction is. And the friction could be your interventions. So do I have to wait for a member of staff to come and ID me because I'm buying a bottle of wine? Have I put my car keys down on the security scale and that's created a mismatch on the weight-based security? It can be as simple as actually my GUI and my workflow is not particularly intuitive or easy to follow. And then as a consumer, I'm kind of confused where I need to go to navigate through the process. And the retailers that are really deploying technology well nowadays are really laser focused on all of these little aspects of the process. And the ones that are using data really effectively are even quantifying the negative effect that that particular piece of friction is having on their business in a monetary term. And if you start with the data in that way, it's really easy to quantify the size of the issue that you have within your store. And then when you do develop the technology or deploy a piece of innovation, it's very easy to then track the effect that it's had on the consumer journey. So we spend a lot of time with retailers actually analyzing their data, because it's like a treasure map. It shows you all of the areas that you should be focusing to try and reduce that friction. And then, as Matt said, finding the right innovation to actually solve some of those friction points is really, really important. But as he also said very eloquently, the whole build it and they will come mentality just doesn't work. And we as a technology provider very much look at the technology development curve, but we also look at the consumer adoption curve, and they may run in parallel, but they never run together. And finding that sweet spot in the middle where you have a piece of technology that's delivering against those friction points that you're trying to solve, but also is something that consumers are willing to adopt, is the kind of sweet spot that you need to find between the two.
Exactly. Well, perfect transition then. How should retailers measure the success of self-service implementation?
So
We've got
for
all
us,
this data now, and you're right, data analysis paralysis. And that's one of the things that makes me most jazzed about Gen AI is finally, I think we're going to have some solutions that help us get through the data in different ways than we've had before. But what are some of those KPIs that you think are relevant and maybe where retailers can get started? And then some of those that might be a little bit more advanced.
Sure. So for us, there's three key areas that we would look at. The first is consumer experience. So there's different ways of measuring consumer experience. There's one particular retailer we work with, and they actually quantify the consumer experience per square foot in their stores. So they really gather a lot of information from their consumers, either live in the store or via the loyalty system, to really understand what do consumers think of the new journeys, the new technology that they're putting into store. Ultimately, as Matt said, if it doesn't add value to the consumer experience, they won't use it. So getting the consumer buy-in, getting the consumer understanding that this is there to improve the experience for them, to make it more efficient for them, is absolutely key. So consumer experience is one metric. One thing that we haven't talked about, which is a really, really rich channel of information or feedback, is what do the staff think? We've talked a lot about training the staff or bringing them along on that journey to make sure that they accept the technology. But ultimately, they're on the shop floor day in, day out. They're the ones that are the conduit that's getting the feedback from the consumers, both good and bad, and they understand the processes. And as long as you're positioning technology to help staff be more efficient, generally it's well accepted, but they are a wealth of knowledge in terms of being able to gather feedback from the shop floor of what is actually happening and what do consumers really think of the technology. So that would be the second metric, staff feedback. And then the third is really using that data. And you're absolutely right. Using AI really helps to speed up the efficiency of analyzing big data in the stores, but looking at things like, what are my utilization rates? Has revenue gone up or gone down? How has technologies affected my basket size or my payment types? Have we seen a massive shift to card only? These are all metrics that should be built into the business case of the technology, but critically should be providing the feedback loop on a continuous basis. And it's not a one-shot analysis. You put a piece of technology into the store, you can measure it for the 6 weeks that it's there for pilot and then sign it off and say, yeah, it was that a success. But if you look at the trends within retail, the trends amongst consumers, technology trends, you've got three massively changing trend markets, and these are all coinciding. And if you're not continually analyzing, continually understanding what's happening in your store, you will be left behind. So this is very much a process of continuous improvement. It's not a one-shot deal.
Well, by the way, participants, I promise here we're going to have a few minutes for questions. We're going to move into talking about the future trends and some of the takeaways before we pivot to questions. But Mueller, how does self-service fit into a broader retail digital transformation strategy? Right, we've thrown out AI, we've thrown out RFID. We haven't really talked about personalization and self-service. I mean, I could be scanning a product in store and it might come up with some recommendations based on who I am. So what are those? Where do you see self-service fitting in there? And then I'd love to get you've talked about Publix, but what I'd still love to hear from both of you are companies you believe that have done it really well, that they're thinking about self-service, not just within a vacuum, but within their broader digital transformation strategy?
Yeah, I think it's like totally inclusive. Self-service is totally a part of the full digital transformation. It's just you have to figure out where's the touch points that you want to pull that lever. And another company that I think that does a really amazing job of this is probably one of the first that I've seen do it was Starbucks. And on their transformation, digital transformation, they started putting in geo-targeted push notifications to people that were near stores, just so they could say, hey, we have your favorite coffee here or whatever it is, your favorite drink. Press here to purchase it now. And it was there ready for them to pick up as soon as they got to the store because they knew exactly how long it would take them to get to the store. So they just found ways to enhance that consumer experience. So I think you're going to look at all those touch points along the journey, and you're going to figure out ways that are going to either enhance the consumer experience or are going to help you operationalize and create efficiencies for your stores, because those are the two major things that we're trying to do as retailers. So we want to create better consumer experiences, and we want to reduce that bottom line and make sure that we are operating efficiently. So every single touch point where this is a factor and can come into play is absolutely where we need to be considering it.
I gotta say, I'm somewhat embarrassed. I had not thought about Starbucks and the mobile checkout experience, right? Is really a fantastic example of self-service that customers adopted incredibly quickly, because it did have very, very little friction in the process. All right. So nobody wants to hear from me. They want to hear from you, Matt. What are your thoughts on this?
So I completely agree with what Matt just said, and I think that we've moved away from a linear customer journey. The customer journey is now very cyclical. How do I engage that consumer? How do I drive them to my store? How do I make sure that when they're in the store, they have the best experience possible so that they leave thinking, that was fantastic, I want to come back to that store? And then how do I re-engage with that consumer to drive them back into that store? The Starbucks example is a really, really great example of how you engage with consumers outside of the traditional journey. We sometimes get caught in the trap that the journey starts when you enter the door and it stops when you leave the store. But actually engaging with that consumer when they're away from the store is incredibly powerful, particularly when you think about some of the trends that existed during COVID, where a lot of people migrated to online shopping. And retailers have really got to think about, how do I engage with that consumer and entice them back into my physical store? How do I delight them with a fantastic experience while they're there? Provide them with the choice to engage with you as a brand in the way that they want, to engage with technology or members of staff in the way that they want, and ultimately engage them once they come back into that store. So customer journey planning is a very, very important part of that process. And then really slotting the technology in to remove that friction and to delight at every single part of the journey.
Well, we're going to talk about AI, one of the biggest topics of our industry, and any industry, frankly, right? The last 2 years in particular, this year. But before we do that, I do want to comment that unified commerce, right, and the paradigm shift that retailers need to have around how they think about the customer experience. And unified commerce has been tagged as a technology initiative, but it's not. It's an operating model shift that says you truly now you have all this data around your customer. We know that the customer experience is all wacky and all over the place. So you need to think about what's that unified experience you want to provide and the technologies that support that, your digital transformation strategy. And of course, self-service is part of that. So, all right, let's move then into AI. We've got a couple of more minutes. How do you see AI making an impact in the world of self-service? And, even some nuggets around the overall retail landscape, but in particular, not just self-checkout, but self-service.
Absolutely. So AI was obviously the massive buzzword in retail last year, and we're now starting to see a lot of those technologies trickle out into the stores. And we've very much got a bit of a paradox of technologies. We've got on one end, the kind of just walk out type technologies that a lot of retailers have experienced and played around with. But I think what we're quickly seeing is there's a big gap between that customer adoption curve and the technology development curve. And I'm not sure we've really figured that out. I think the retailers that are really doing AI well and are really experimenting and finding good, solid use cases are really actually dialing down the scale of what they're trying to achieve. So the just walk out technologies are very much boil the ocean, change the entire customer journey, change my entire infrastructure and my store setup, and provide a brand new customer journey that removes friction for that consumer. On the other end of the scale, there's a lot of retailers that are actually looking at, well, what friction exists within my store from a technology touch point perspective, and how can AI actually solve that? So we've talked about a couple of use cases. Buying wine in a store. It's a frustrating process. If you're going to wait to be ID'd, you have to find a member of staff who comes over, they physically ID you in an environment where a lot of retailers are struggling to get staff in their stores. They're understaffed. So that's a lengthy process. It's frustrating. You have to wait around. So, a great technology that's being used more and more is actual facial recognition for age estimation. A great use of AI that doesn't require any prior setups. You don't have to be a law member. You don't have to have pre-registered. The AI can actually scan your face with a picture. It can estimate your age. And then depending on how the retailer has configured it, you don't have to wait for a member of staff to come and actually ID you. So that's a really, really simple use of AI for one particular use case that really delivers a great consumer experience and reduces friction. And I think we're going to see more of these smaller point solutions start to become commonplace across the experience within store. Another really big frustration for consumers is the fruit and vegetables. So we're moving away from plastic packaging in a lot of environments. And what does that mean? Well, I have more items that don't have a barcode on them. So I have to process them in some way. I have to go to a weight scale somewhere in the store and look for that item and then, find the right type of apples that I'm buying and then print a label out and stick it on or even just add it straight to the transaction if you're at self-service. But item recognition is now pretty commonplace. It's pretty easy to do from an AI perspective. So why can't I use item recognition to actually identify that I've put an apple down on the scale? And then I don't have to thumb through that catalog. Another great point solution that really adds to the consumer experience and is not particularly complicated to do. And then the third one, which I want to touch on, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but I don't think we probably talked about it enough, is retail shrink. I think we've all read that cost of living crisis has driven shrink up in the retail environment. It's quadrupled in some markets. And where AI can play a really crucial role is helping retailers to understand how much shrink do I have in my store? What type of shrink, i.e., how is it happening and where is it happening? And this is a journey we're going on with a lot of retailers at the moment where, you read the US press, self-service is the devil. It drives shrink in the retail environment. What we're actually finding is only, in some cases, 30% of shrink is happening at self-service checkout. And that means 70% is happening elsewhere in the store. So we're in this kind of whack-a-mole type situation where if we lock down one particular touch point and make it very, very difficult for people to steal there, the people that are maliciously stealing will gravitate to other areas of the store. So we're going to be constantly chasing this ongoing battle of trying to reduce shrink in the store. The other thing that I would say that AI plays a crucial role in is you can, with behavioral tracking, with a fully integrated solution, you can actually determine, is this a malicious theft attempt or is this a non-malicious theft attempt? And that's a really, really important differentiation, because if you've got a loyal customer who's coming into that store and their 3 children are running around and causing, a nuisance, they might be distracted. They may have made a mistake. And if you treat that loyal customer like they're a criminal, you're going to alienate them and you're going to deliver a bad experience and they're not going to come back to that store. So behavioral tracking is actually a really, really important way of differentiating between the malicious and non-malicious. And then linked back to the staff, how you engage your staff in that situation. It's not just about the technology. Identifying shrink is the first hurdle you have to overcome. What do you do then? What do you do once you've identified shrink within the store? Well, you have to rely on the store staff to then come and deal with that situation, but you don't want to put that member of staff into a potentially dangerous or difficult situation. So coaching and training the staff, and Matt brought it up in the previous question about bringing staff on that journey and training them in the right way. Sitting behind a checkout on an attendant POS lane and scanning items and chatting with a member of staff is very different to being up on your feet, shoulder to shoulder with the consumer, interacting with them in potentially a hostile situation. So how you train your staff to deal with those situations makes a big, big difference to the end consumer and ultimately how they're left feeling when they leave that situation.
Well, you nailed it. I mean, I think you gave some great advice for retailers. And before we go to our key takeaways, Mueller, is your advice, right? What are the top three things that retailers really should be thinking about? As we know, we have these future trends coming, as Matt had discussed. But I'm a retailer now. What do I do?
Yeah, AI, right? Yes, definitely you need to involve AI in some form. So everything that Matt said, ditto. Yes, absolutely. We need to think about how do we apply AI to our business to help us meet some of these trends. But one that's really intriguing me, and I think is getting a lot more hype, is hyper personalization, right? So how do we personalize that journey for an individual consumer? And we're going to be able to find new ways to build a relationship with consumers based off of the information that we have on them. And AI helps kind of enhance that even more so. But consumers are expecting journeys with your brand that is hyper personalized. You know them by name. You know what they're going to purchase. You know exactly what they want before they even know they want it. We have to figure that piece out for sure. That's a trend that's really big. And another thing is sustainability. And I think that's something that kind of goes under the radar quite a bit. But I mean, consumers expect retailers and brands to be sustainable. That is an expectation. And they're going to go with brands and retailers that are more sustainable. So how are you bringing that sustainability to life is going to be extremely important. And it's something that retailers need to figure out. How do they message that and communicate it to brands, to the consumers?
Yeah. And so let's talk about, or at least show the key takeaways that came from the report that obviously fit beautifully into the discussions we have. So when you think about these takeaways, and we heard it from Mueller and Matt, really think about what the customer experience is in that layout of your store. What's the flow, and how are you reducing the friction points as it relates to self-checkout? AI, there are endless use cases. And I think in my experience working with retailers with AI, it's really hard to figure out where to start. But again, thinking about it, if you put it in the framework of how do you want to optimize the customer experience, I think then that helps you get there. And then you talked about, you said platform, right, or modular solutions, and thinking about self-service within the context of your overall digital transformation strategy that is supporting that unified experience for your customers. So let's see, are there any questions? So Andy, you're going to get the latest one. What are the current usage figures for self-service in the USA and UK, share of sales and usage? Curious what you mean by usage. And I think you might be able to find some of those nuggets in the report, if I'm not mistaken. But either Matt, do you have something top of mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a pretty open question to answer because obviously it depends on the sub-vertical of retail that we're talking about, but it also fluctuates based on the format of the store. But both the USA and the UK were or are very developed markets when it comes to self-service. They've had self-service deployed for as I say, nearly 25 years now, and it's a fairly developed market from a consumer perspective. If I give a couple of examples, so we have some retailers in a convenience store format where actually self-service might be a slightly higher density. We have some retailers that are driving 95, 96% utilization through self-service, 96% of consumers using self-service. For larger stores or stores with a slightly more diverse set of customer journeys, that would drop to say 40%. But on average, if you take a grocery retailer, we should be seeing somewhere between 50 and 65% average utilization across the entire estate.
I love that we've got some global representation here, not just UK, but Middle East. Either one of you had any experiences over there? And Samir, I'm curious if if that's where you're from and if you've had some experiences over there too.
Matt, do you want to take this or do you want me to jump in?
Please jump in, Matt.
This is the hard one. I like a hard question. Yeah, thank you. And it's okay if we don't know the answer, but now we're going to get curious about it.
Sure.
We don't.
So there are a lot of numbers associated with self-service in the Middle East. A great place to start to understand the size of a market in terms of how many self-service devices are being deployed is RBR. RBR are an independent agency that publish a report on self-service utilization on an annual basis. They've just published their 2024 numbers for the previous year, and that really shows the breakdown of self-service deployments by country and by area, including the Middle East, as well as they predict some of the growth expectations for each area or country. So there's a great wealth of knowledge in there, and I'd urge you all to go and have a look at that. In terms of self-service numbers for the Middle East, it's certainly an emerging market for self-service. Slightly slower in terms of starting adoption of self-service, but we're really starting to see that accelerate. And it's being accelerated actually more in the hospitality side of things. We're seeing a lot of hospitality retailers, QSR retailers deploy, as you can see there on the right-hand side, more kind of order and pay type kiosks to actually support that hospitality type experience. But there are a number of grocery retailers as well that have deployed self-service very, very successfully as a traditional self-service device, but also as things like finalization points for scan as you shop device. That's a big driver in the Middle East for an end touch point where you can finalize your journey, where you've used mobile or a retailer supplied device. And then you can deal with all of the issues that maybe you can't do on a mobile, like how do I use a voucher or a coupon, or I want to pay with cash, or I need to get ID'd because of a particular item. So there are some great examples of self-service coming out of the Middle East.
Fantastic. You hit that, that out of the ballpark. There's one question I do want to touch on that says, if everyone is developing their own version of AI in the retail space, how will customer wanting to use it decide what are the main factors of choosing the right solution? And I'm going to suggest, I think something that's sorely missing for most retailers is actually an AI strategy that looks at all of the different places that it can be used and talk about unification, right? And leverage of data and putting the customer at the center. And yes, there are point solutions for AI, and there's an explosion of them all there. But I think with an AI operating model mindset that's thinking through the processes, the people, the KPIs, the technology, the experiences at the heart of it for your customers, as well as your employees, is how retailers need to think about it. And right now, there's still just a lot of testing and learning, which I think is somewhat slowing down some of the adoption of AI. And there's a huge opportunity to accelerate it with a more whole systems thinking approach. We have just a couple of minutes left. So there is, I'm trying to see if we've got a question that can be good. What, by the way, I've got a last. Hi, Michael, that you said you need to introduce a self-checkout license because you're inevitably stuck behind someone who has no clue. I personally don't get to use it very much because I like to buy wine. And in California, you can't check out with alcohol at self-checkout. But I think a lot of these we've already had the opportunity to touch on, and we can get back to these. I'm hoping, Aaliyah, if you guys can and get these information down, because it will be able to do a recap and maybe get to some of these questions at another time. But I just want to say big shout out. I learned a lot. I was more of a consumer as it related to self-service, certainly knew it on the contact center technology side. But really, this has been fantastic. And I think it says, right, it's time to myth bust. It's time to make this happen. The customer, we want it as customers, and it can be done right and easy and frictionless. So no time like the present. So again, thank you, Matt Squared. I've enjoyed getting to moderate this conversation, and I hope we get to keep the conversation going. Check in. Let's check in and check out 6 months from now to see what's going on.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It was a great conversation. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for joining.